Grief Stories is not a crisis resource. Please seek support from a qualified professional in your area to meet your unique emotional and medical needs. You're listening to the Grief Stories podcast. I'm your host, Maureen Pollard, a social worker with an interest in helping people find hope and healing when someone they love has died. In each episode, you'll hear a conversation with a guest, sharing their story and insights about what can help when you're adapting to loss. At Grief Stories, we're helping grief make sense, one story at a time. Today's guest is Betsy Fisher, and she's sharing with us the story of losing her son, Marshall. Welcome to the Grief Stories podcast. Thanks for joining me today, Betsy.
Thank you. Thanks, Maureen. It's really, really nice to be here.
Great. At Grief Stories, we believe in the power of sharing stories to help people heal in grief. And so we ask people to share their stories, hoping that it'll help them to have a place to share and hoping that their stories will be then a touchstone for someone else who may have experienced a similar kind of loss. So I begin by asking you to share your story of loss with us.
Sure. My name is Betsy Fisher. I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. And 10 years ago, actually, this very week, I adopted a young man from the Florida foster care system, my soon-to-be son, Marshall. He was 13, and he and I adopted one another, as he liked to say. I was a single woman, a teacher here in town, and had been thinking of adoption for some time. I always like to share that because it's such a unique backstory in many ways to what was to come ahead. But we found one another and were adopted here in Tallahassee and hit the ground running with lots of challenges, but lots of love. It was a young man. Marshall was a young man who had, by 13, already been in as many as 15 or more placements and transitions and abandoned by his birth mother. And so he had a lot of trauma and a lot of issues as a young man. Not even a year after our adoption and bonding and getting to know one another and him moving in, he was diagnosed with osteosarcoma, bone cancer. Fell off a bike in the driveway, and what we thought was a simple bump on the knee turned into be the C word, as my sister couldn't even bring herself to say. And I remember thinking that day, standing in the driveway, just sort of looking up towards the heavens saying, how can this be? This child who could barely wear a blood pressure cuff from years of trauma and things that he'd been through was now going to endure chemo and an eventual amputation of his right leg and more chemo and several hospitals and surgeries. But somehow we just did it. We did the next thing and just kept moving. And what started in that driveway with that horrible realization would become 4 years of going back and forth from our home here in Tallahassee to Gainesville, Florida, which was our treating hospital there. Within days of that realization, Marshall was biopsied, starting chemo, losing hair, and middle of that summer, lost his leg as well. For that whole first year, it was like nothing else I can remember, and my heart starts racing just thinking about it. But we were surrounded by an incredible community, family. They weren't right here with us, but they were as close as they could be and key at certain points in time. And we did it. We got into it, and that became our home away from home, and nurses and staff became our family. And strangely enough, we did what we could each day. And we had the second year, Marshall had sort of a cancer-free year. We had a Make-A-Wish trip, and I went back to work, and he was a student at the school I was teaching at, and life kind of got back to normal. Beach trips with family and other things, and then almost a year to the day, it's interesting how that happens. It metastasized to his lungs, and we were right back into it again, in a different part of the body, but more chemo and back and forth to the hospital. We would spend those last 2 years of his life in Gainesville and also at St. Jude Hospital in Memphis. All the while, I remind myself, and we keep in mind today, that this is a child that had been through such issues and had serious trust issues and anxiety issues. So we were constantly starting over and earning the trust of nurses and doctors and myself of my son, who was very scared, but very creative and very resilient. He was an artist, no doubt, and art therapy programs and painting, drawing, building Legos, so many things distracted in beautiful ways and propelled him through such just horrible times. And we were involved with some other organizations as ambassadors for childhood cancer awareness and other things. And so we were busy, and we were living life in the midst even of all of this tragedy. Finally, in May of 2018, we had come home from St. Jude, and we'd been home in Florida, and Marshall had decided he was tired of chemo. He realized their doctor told him there weren't going to be very many good options, if any, and he wanted to just come home and be a kid and have friends over and play tennis from his wheelchair and do normal things and take an oral med and just live. And that's what we did. And in May of 2018, a Mother's Day weekend, which has changed my Mother's Day forever, Marshall passed away here in Tallahassee at a hospice facility. And, my world turned upside down again in a different way from the time it did in that driveway when it all first began. And I've spent that's 5 years ago, a little over 5 years now, since walking my grief journey and trying to continually keep him on my shoulder and look for him and his light wherever I can and honor his legacy.
I think that, it's such a touching story because you take this young man who had already experienced so much grief and loss in his short life. Every placement is a feeling of grief. Every person that shows up in his life and then disappears from his life, right? And all of those moves and changes and schools and people. And he'd already lived that by the time that he and you found each other and came together. And so then to walk this path with him and to have you to walk with him, it's so painful and so beautiful at once that he had you to identify that element of him needing to trust and him needing to learn to trust and being able to be compassionate in that, viewing his experiences as having shaped that behavior that would have come with not trusting, right?
Right.
And so all of those pieces of his life that came together to bring the two of you together so that you could be his support system in this journey, really powerful to me. It sounds like a lot of the ways that you helped him and that people helped him, and he helped himself through this experience were kind of expressive arts. That creativity can be such a healing force. The opportunity to, you said he did some art therapy and Lego, a few things like that. How did you find for him that those expressive arts opportunities worked? Like, how did that work for him?
It was such a natural thing when I think back on it now. I thought of it as all along, I think, as ways to keep him preoccupied, distracted, busy, happy. But as I look back now, I realize he really was very talented, and it was expressive. I remember one of the first. He wasn't real good at opening up and talking to people. Psychologists or others would come, counselors would come in the room, and I remember one of the first times an art therapist came in, and they just drew. They sat on the edge of the bed and they just sketched and drew. And this is so typical of what began to happen. He drew, I don't even remember what would have made him think of it, but it was a figure like a Roman soldier, kind of a figure with the old Roman clothes and gear on. And the figure had a prosthetic leg. And as the woman left the room later, I had stepped outside so they could just visit and draw. And she said, that speaks volumes. And so many things that he did were those kinds of expressions of what he was feeling, scared about, but also very joyful things that would get hung around our room. I wrote something about this the other day, how we would hang his artwork off IV poles and on the backs of calendars and things on the wall, just to kind of proof of life that we were existing and that he was flourishing in a strange way. Even in a hospital setting, he was creating and living.
And I think that's the beauty of the expressive arts when it comes to all the feelings that humans have, is it's that opportunity to explore the feelings, express them, to transform pain and fear into something that is beautiful in the world and courageous, right?
Yeah.
And Marshall was beautiful and courageous.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. So then, yeah. And then you lost him. He was gone in hospice. And you were able to give him as much peace as you could. And then you were grieving in a different way. You were grieving leading up to his death, because we when we know it's coming, we have anticipatory grief, and then it happens and we have that it shifts our grief. So what were some of the challenges you faced in that experience of grief on this journey with Marshall and after he died?
Yeah, there are a lot. I think right off the bat, and in some ways still today, Maureen, for me, one of the biggest struggles has been the identity piece, because as a single woman or just a person making a choice about expanding family and bringing this young man into my life, joining life with him. Months later, him being diagnosed, we literally kind of grew up together and bonded during those hospital years. And I remember after the grief fog sort of initially began to wear off after the first few months or however long that lasted, just saying, who am I now? Who do I even want to be now? And how does it matter? And what was that all about? It's almost like pinch me. Did that all just really happen? And so, while I could share, there were a lot of things, challenges initially about the ways people react to you and things people say, and those are all important. For me, one of the biggest challenges was trying to figure out my identity. I'd been a teacher for 28 years, but I didn't feel like that person anymore. I had a hard time communicating that, I think, to friends and family, who were so supportive but uncomfortable talking about it. And I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to share my son's story and keep saying his name and talk. And you have that feeling sometimes, people coming towards you like you have some neon flashing sign that reminds everybody, oh, wait, she's just lost a child. And so I think that was probably my biggest challenge, was determining, kind of trying to figure out, who am I, finding some confidence again. And I still struggle with that. But I am getting better at talking about it, sharing the story, and just at some point I just said, this is what I'm going to do. And it's becoming maybe my new identity, I think.
Mm. You know, what you're saying resonates. As a grief and trauma therapist, I spend a fair bit of time with bereaved parents, and that identity piece is so important. It's that recognition that you are still Marshall's mom, right? So how you parent Marshall now that he's passed away is different than how you parented him when he was here physically, but you're still his mom. And that connection is still there, still powerful, still full of love. And that ability to speak about Marshall, about your experience, is you talk about that as giving you some purpose and some identity confirmation. And that's such an important part of the grief journey. The literature talks about 4 tasks of mourning. And one of them is, the first is to accept the reality that this has happened. And when you talk about that grief fog that you were in, we're in that fog while we're trying to figure out if this is real, and try to figure out how to accept that often. The second step or task is the concept of feeling the feelings, right? Because sometimes when we're in the fog, we're numb. We don't really feel the feelings fully. And as the fog lifts, then the feelings kind of rise up.
Right.
And then feeling the connection to the person who died is the third task, right? Finding, how am I going to be connected to them now that they're not here physically? And then finding new purpose and meaning in life is the fourth task. And you're on this journey. You're on this journey because of your deep love of Marshall and this time that you spent with him, as his mom physically here, and now as his mom energetically, I suppose, right?
Right.
So that all makes perfect sense to me, that this is your experience and how hard it has been to understand it and then to explain it to people, right? Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head there several times. That's it exactly.
Yeah. So as you begin to speak about it, and you're doing so more now, are you finding that there are things that bring you hope and some feeling of healing in this experience?
Yeah, I absolutely am. And as I kind of alluded to, I don't know if I'd done this with you a few years ago, I probably would have been in one of those other stages, so to speak, that you mentioned. But at some point after that grief fog kind of lifted, at least a little bit, I realized I needed to just be telling his story, and not worrying so much about why had this happened, but just get on with things. And I still grieve. I still have tough days where I want to just roll back over in bed. But I'm finding more often than not, I was out this morning talking with a group of college students who work with an organization advocating for childhood cancer awareness this month of September. And I just find, I don't know, part of it's the teacher in me, but the larger part of it is the mom in me that just finds hope in them. And the fact that they didn't even know Marshall, and they're sitting there just absorbing and taking in the purpose and meaning that I'm trying to convey, and listening to the stories intently. I've done a lot of work recently with some volunteer work with other bereaved parents, which for me has been incredibly meaningful. Very hard and very emotional, but it's so therapeutic, and I know that it's helping others. And It's just, there's nothing like talking to another parent or listening to another parent who's been through something as similar and horrible as this experience. So I like to think, and I do a lot as well with the art therapy program I mentioned that helped Marshall so much. They have sort of given me a platform to be kind of a guest writer from time to time and share experiences and stories. So it's been an interesting give and take. I feel like I'm dedicating more of my time now to giving back to the places and people that helped us, trying to help other families who are in similar situations, but also just sharing Marshall's story of resilience and love. And I was going to say earlier, he used to, he and I talked a lot about making more. That child could take a hospital sock and turn it into a puppet in 5 minutes flat. And he could take take things and make more of them. And I realized after he died, it's essentially what he kind of did with his own life. And I sort of have taken that on myself, and kind of it drives me to think, what more can I possibly make meaning wise from what's happened to him and to he and I together.
Beautiful. And I think, so many things that you say in that discussion about what's brought you hope and healing really resonate. The sense of peer support, the ability for you to bring your story to groups of parents who are walking that path now, to share the story so that they know that they're not alone, and to help them see that there's going to be shifting for them, to help them face what they're facing in those early stages of the experience. And that's such a powerful tool, and it's a powerful experience for you to be able to share that story, and it's powerful for them to receive your story and to learn from it, and such a beautiful opportunity. We know that when people walk together through the same kinds of experiences, there's really a lot of good healing that can happen when you feel understood, seen, and heard, right?
I agree.
Yeah. And also, what a beautiful opportunity to work with the art therapy organization and to share writing, because writing is so powerful as well. Writing helps you move what's inside of you onto the page, where you can reflect on it with a different perspective and then share it with the world in a way that allows people to connect again, right? Yeah. With somebody who understands, and something that really helps them find their way in this darkness of, the pain of grief.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, writing has been a huge. I liked to write before, but I hadn't written really in some time, certainly while we were in the hospital, other than just worry lists and lists of medicines and things to do. But that was something I seized on early on in my grief and continue to do. And you're right, it's been a lifesaver for me. And I often mention that to newly bereaved parents, that you may not find the people who will listen the way you'd like them to, or the people to ask you what you want, but you can write it down and start with little things and see where it takes you.
Very much so. I do work with therapeutic writing and songwriting for healing and wellness, and particularly, through grief and trauma experiences, and the opportunity to write and reflect, and then sometimes to release it. To release it from you into the air, or sometimes, some of the most beautiful songs are songs about grief, and they're tender and they're powerful, and they touch on people's heart experiences and loss, right?
For sure.
Although I think that the thing about therapeutic writing is that it doesn't have to be pretty either. some of the things you've written in your journey might have been filled with hard feelings like anger or regret or different things like that. And it's just as powerful to write that as it is to write the beautiful words. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've had this really powerful experience, a really touching journey with Marshall in his young life, in the short time that you walked with him, really, relatively speaking. It's changed your life.
Yeah, there's no doubt. From the adoption day I alluded to the diagnosis day, to the day he died, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, I think, Maureen. It was the worst days of my life, but yet there was so much beauty in there and joy, and I try to see that and keep that, to pull those two, side to side, that you can feel grief and joy at the same time, and empty and full at the same time, and learning that that's okay, and it's actually kind of normal that they coexist. Is a helpful thing for me to remind myself, but also to remind newly bereaved parents, I think. But he was truly a gift, and it doesn't make it all okay. And I still mourn that loss and grieve him, but I was blessed to have had him in my life for sure.
Mm-hmm. And part of healing grief to me is the ability to hold both the pain and the joy, the pain and the love, right? Because at the heart of it, you're grieving because the love was so great. And so that's beautiful and painful all at once. And humans have the capacity to hold all of it. Yeah. And it's easier to have the ability to hold all of it when we have people who stand up and show up beside us when we're in those feelings, and doing all the things that come with living with a terminal diagnosis and then grieving someone we love.
Right.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to mention about your experience that you think might help bereaved parents who might be walking a similar path?
Well, I think even your grief journey is an evolution to me. I remember little advice people gave me along the way and how that's changed. And now I pass some of that on. But in the beginning, things were as simple as just do the next thing. Some days it may be brushing your teeth or doing a load of laundry. And then other things people told me, like, you can't know until you know. You can't understand the depth of feeling until you've been there. And I'm sure I was on the other end of that before I lost a child, and kind of be forgiving in that way when people say things that you could take possibly the wrong way or take them to heart. And then I think as time goes on, to realize in my grief that I'm still parenting my son. I'm still a mom. I'm still parenting Marshall. And every morning I wake up, I read a quote from a woman. It escapes me right now, but it was something about parenting her child, and how every day she woke up thinking about, how am I going to parent him today? And that helped me too. And to know that I'm stepping forward with him, pulling him, not moving on, but moving forward with him, and doing things and being with people and causes that he cared about, and sharing how his life mattered, because that, I know, for the life he had, I'm just blessed and fortunate to be able to share such a remarkable story about a resilient young man, and be able to say he was my son too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the power, the beauty of that, right? The depth of beauty in our ability to connect and love, despite sometimes great hardship.
And to share those stories, I think, that's why I was so interested in speaking with you today too, is just, I think the power of our stories it's really all we have, is that connection and stories that we can share and honestly just listen to one another.
It's so true. And of course, at Grief Stories, we believe that 100%, that sharing stories is a powerful connector and opens pathways to healing that we don't always even know about, even when we're sharing a story or listening to a story. Sometimes it settles into us. It's like planting a seed that grows into, like you had said, the evolution of a grief experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, Maureen. It's, I told people I think most moms and parents like talking about their kids, and that doesn't change when your child dies. So anytime I can share this story and possibly help someone else, but it was a pleasure to talk with you today.
Wonderful. I think you're right. I think that the more that we get to say our children's names, whether they're here or passed on, the more that we carry their presence with us. Right?
Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Grief Stories podcast. I'm your host, Maureen Pollard. Please remember that grief is universal, but every person's experience of grief is unique. While our interviews are intended to help listeners feel validation and reassurance, we realize that these stories may be different from your own. Please visit our website, griefstories.org, for more stories of hope and healing.